It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Mel Horvath Lucid is a wild, creative, and lifelong learner. Mel serves as an interfaith spiritual director and ordained minister in the spiritualist tradition and works on restorative justice, with a focus on how we can do things differently toward love, toward peace, toward healing. Mel's work centers around building bigger spaces for awareness, realness, and belonging, with self-acceptance as the bridge. Welcome, Mel.
Thanks so much. Good to be here. So as we step into the new year, I invite you to think about humility as a companion. And I want to take some time to actually explore the texture, the energy, the realness that that is humility. So the first thing I want to offer is this. The truth requires no defense. And we're talking about those deep-rooted truths. So there's nothing today that I'm going to offer you that you don't already know. Spiritual practice is to hear the most straightforward ideas and then to put them into bodied practice. That's the part that's complex and nuanced. And so again, there's nothing you don't already know that I'm going to share today. And the practices where they become interesting is in the application, in the embodiment of them. And so we want to explore that, an invitation to explore that today. The practice is challenging, and this is healthy, though it's nearly impossible without our presence. And the reality is we work in and live in a world that is designed to distract us, designed to not connect us in the ways that to show us where we are disconnected, to call us back. And so part of our responsibility is to be present and connected with the home of who we are, to know when we are moving away from it. That's our responsibility. Especially, as I mentioned, in this world designed to distract us. The spiritually examined life calls us back to who we really are. But the reality is that there's always more to who we are. And so the invitation is to explore with you just some of the pieces of that and some of how that might come together for you. So I invite you to consider for a moment what humility is to you, what you think being humble is. It's amazing to me that our Western dictionary definition of humility says a modest or low view of one's own importance, that this is somehow humble. Yet in Buddhism, humility is defined as a virtue, a natural byproduct, actually, of love, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And what I would suggest with these qualities that we then embody, that the byproduct then is humility, is that these are applied inward first. And that is a powerful piece of humility, because if we are not giving ourselves love, if we are not holding those tender pieces of ourselves, or let's be honest, those parts we wish were not there, with a level of love, compassionate care, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, the ability to balance the more that I speak of, right? The truth is we're entire universes inside us, entire universes. The idea that you will ever know all your intimate universes before they once again change and take a new constellation or form is ridiculous. Yet so often we give our power away. And particularly, I own that for myself. This was a big thing for me. As a queer person, I thought that my responsibility was to explain who I was to the world. Yet, no matter how much I explained, there's no way of putting me what? Oh, in a box. But we had to catch on at some point, right? We have to catch on that that's what we're doing. We're creating these boxes and we're creating them to be simple. But the truth of us is we're complex, multifaceted universes with abundant more. So what I've noticed in maturing my spiritual practice, it has been towards the application of humility as a virtue, the byproduct of compassion and care, and just even a mindset that understands I'm changing. So the truth is that part of us will always know when we're operating outside of our highest good. And that's a gift, and it's what I would call inner tension. The greatest conflict you will ever have, I promise you, is within yourself. And oftentimes then what we do is we move away from presence with ourselves. We distract, we numb out, we defend, we advice give, we try to change the world around us. We basically do everything we can to avoid having to be with self. And so I invite you to consider that those indicators, as I mentioned, include defensiveness, lack of peace, increased anxiety, and an obsessive need for other people to understand. I only came into the trueness of myself 5 years ago, and offered what I knew was on the inside of me for years and years before that. And in coming into that place of trueness and authenticity and honoring of self, I can tell you this: the world is not more accepting these days of people like me. Yet I am holding greater peace, joy, love, compassion than I ever had. So it isn't about the world being completely the way you want it out there before you own the power that you have to transform your life. And in the work that I do in restorative justice, there's a branch called transformative justice. And you may find it interesting to know that transformative justice was actually birthed from the idea of predominantly Black, queer, and trans people who sought to live with joy, love, and robust wellness, independent of the system designed to harm us. So when we take back our power and lean into what is ours, what we can do right now, things change. Acknowledging more of what is going on with you, particularly those parts that seem polarized, creates a greater capacity to be present in a world with others, particularly when views are polarized. What I'm suggesting is this: if you yourself cannot hold the tension between pieces of yourself, and let me offer you some examples. I'm both childlike wonder to some weird high-level degree, and also really deep, incredibly deep and dark. And those are both there. I was having a session last week with a client of mine, and they were sitting with two pieces that were in conflict. One of them really desperately wanted to be seen, and the other one wanted to slink and move away. So one wanted to be seen and one wanted to be disappearing. And I said, so what if you just held that for a moment? And so they did, which is incredibly uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to hold the tension. And in that, they came to a deeper understanding of a need they had. By allowing those pieces to be there, which is very vulnerable work, it's also very courageous work, they could actually see a clear picture of what was there and come to a different understanding for themselves. So according to Dr. Schwartz from the book No Bad Parts, all parts of ourselves are sacred and deserve to be treated as such. Our parts can sometimes be disruptive or harmful, but once they are unburdened, they return to their essential goodness. When we learn to love all of our parts, we can learn to love all people, and that will contribute to healing the world. All of us are born with the subminds or parts, and the key to health and happiness is to honor, understand, and love every part. Again, sounds like simple, just love everything. And yet, love has infinite applications. Sometimes love looks like setting boundaries. Sometimes love looks like calling ourselves in and saying, hey, is this who I want to be? But we can't do the work of calling ourselves up and in to say, hey, is this who I want to be? If we are not willing to acknowledge that piece that is there. One of the things I noticed for me, and I speak honestly about it, and it's really helped me to do so. December for me, for a multitude of reasons, is the darkest, most challenging month of the year for me, hands down. It's exasperated because I live in a world where I'll hear it's the most wonderful time of the year, and we hang bright lights on things, and there's music, and maybe it is for some people. Cool. For me, though, there's been something about allowing myself to feel the feelings I'm feeling, which oftentimes feels like grief. And progressively, over the course of the last few years, I've simply allowed that to be there, noticing it, but not being consumed by it. And now in January, I find myself in a new place, new terrain than I'd been before, where there's this sort of dark side to me, a little part. I kind of look at them as like a little angsty teenager. And these days, that little dark angsty teenager is getting brought along with me. And we smile in our own tension of holding between my incredible optimism and hope for the world around me and this part of me that's like, dude, I don't want to do anything. The conversations we have about what we do consider the most wonderful time of the year. And it's not a time of the year, but it's moments, little glimmers of feeling connected to the elements, to people, to things around me. And those little moments then become moments I take note of. But I've only been able to take note of that which I find valuable and lean into that when I was able to allow what was there to exist more fully. Another way of explaining this one for me is there's a Cherokee parable of a grandfather talking to his grandson about two wolves. And you may have heard this one before, but there's a conversation about the two wolves, and one of them has all of these really desirable qualities: joy, peace, love, caring, connection, and the other one, jealousy and anger and frustration. And so the grandson says, okay, well, like, who wins the fight in you? And the grandfather says, well, it's the one that you feed. And that was a very, very powerful moment. But I started to ask myself a different question in the moment of that parable, and it's this: what happens to the one that you then don't feed? I think about anger in me, and I think about the times where now I know that anger is actually a really necessary initiatory emotion that often tells us when our boundary is being crossed, that something is not okay for us. So it gives us an idea of needs and wants and values and where we need to be. But if we say, hey, anger, I'm just gonna, I don't know, stuff you down or throw you at somebody else, we don't look at the quality of what that anger could do. And so I think about these pieces of ourselves that we then feed, sort of these ones that we think are desirable, and we don't nurture those pieces of ourselves that are sitting there in equal need for our love, compassion, care, and noticing. And all I'm suggesting to you is that when I notice these pieces of myself that are there, particularly, let's keep with the idea of anger, and I bring it close and I ask it what it needs, it speaks to me. Likewise with anxiety, another key one for me. When I ask anxiety what it needs and what's going on for it, and I do so tenderly, I used to worry. I'd feel anxiety and I'd be like, oh no, I'm getting this anxious feeling. And then I was worried about the anxious feeling of anxiety. And now I'm like, oh, hey, anxiety. And anxiety for me, I've given it a little character. So it's kind of like a kind of moving rainbow opaque hair. And it's got big blue eyes. And it's just this little, I'm scared. I'm not sure being. And I bring it close and I hold it. And then anxiety will talk to me. And all I need to do is listen. All I need to do is listen and allow that part of me to have room, and things shift. Transformation happens. So another piece that's connected to living humility as a byproduct to the way that we approach life is our own assessment. We don't assess others. This is we're not taking inventory for one another here. This is our self-inventory of what we say we value. And then inviting ourselves to look at where does that show up in practice. The challenge is that we will have disintegration of values. That's okay. We are human beings. And changing, redirecting, remembering what is important to us and moving back into center home, that's our responsibility. Not this idea of rigid perfectionism, simply to assess and become aware again and again of what it is that is important to us, and that those things are not static. I have different key values in moments of work than I do in moments with my children. That is healthy. And to be able to context change. Also, different values when I'm showing up as a spiritual director. Then listening and being present is the most important thing. And in moments where somebody's asking me to vulnerably share, that would be moments where I'd be valuing courage and vulnerability. So our values are not static, but getting to know your values, and I would suggest starting with sort of the core, how do I want to show up in hard things, is a great question to ask yourself. Who do I want to be when I'm showing up in hard things? What are my values, and how do I practice them when under pressure? So an example of this that was really, really challenging at the time for me to hold was the value of me. I have now 4 adult children and 1 15-year-old. So I remember saying my kids are the most important thing to me. And yet, if you looked at how I spent my time, it was largely at work. And some of that I could give myself tenderness and gentleness for. For many of those years, I was a single parent, putting myself through school, taking care of my kids. But at some point, it became sort of a pattern or a routine that I don't think I was aware of anymore. And simply allowing that to be there, that there was a distance between what I said I valued and what I was practicing, I've noticed the gap decrease. I've noticed that I've started to, in just simply noticing that I've started to allow that to shift and change. To ask again, what is important? What does showing up for my kids and myself look like? And how do I want to be in that relationship? I noticed, though, that we've never hated ourselves to health yet. And yet the self-talk that we oftentimes use is shaming, blaming, and fear-based. And I noticed that a key difference in the changes and shifts that I've seen is that I wasn't doing that. I offered gentleness to myself for what I didn't know, for what I had to do to make ends meet. I offered gentleness to myself for the ways that I did want to avoid my own work, and work was a way of doing work on the outward stuff and the achieving stuff, so I don't have to work on the intrinsic stuff. And yet again, greater peace has come from doing that inner work. when I'm speaking, what I'm speaking about are deepening our practices of self-accountability, being responsive and responsible for what we say and what we do or don't do. But we cannot do that if we do not allow ourselves to hold any of those pieces, right? If we just say, no, 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 I'm not a bad person. And I would say to you, you're right, you're not, but you are human. And you're a really, really blended mix of humanness and magnificence. And when we can hold that, those polars, we start to have a lot more room for us to show up and become who we are. It starts to become a values and practices activity toward embodiment. The peace that I gain in my life does not come from a more accepting or delightful outer world. It comes from me being able to look at how I navigated myself in a situation, in a conversation, in a moment, and being able to say, I feel okay with how I showed up there. And like I said, the truth will push on you. You will always know if you did not show up the way you wanted to. And so we can defend, we can blame, we can do all those things. But at the end of the day, it's going to sit there and it's going to gnaw at you because it was meant to. And when you address it and you own what is yours to own, it will stop gnawing at us. And the gnawing isn't a punishment. It is simply a gift that tells us something is not in alignment with us. Hey, I'm not in alignment. How committed am I to being in alignment with myself, to being home in who I am? And so I really like the quote that says, be someone that makes you happy in a world that has taught us be with someone that makes you happy. No. Be someone that makes you happy. And I promise you, if you do that, risk, courageousness, the willingness to let go of that which is illusion, the willingness to let go of the people that are with you only because you are being what they wish you to be, rather than being who you are and allowing yourself to connect deeply. So there's a Zen Buddhist concept that many of you might know as the beginner's mindset. And really part of this journey toward humility is making room in your mind, heart, and world view for new information. A beginner's mind is a call toward humility, to openness, to curiosity instead of pretension or apathy, instead of judgment or closing down. Without a beginner's mindset, you might approach new subjects with skepticism or familiar ones on autopilot. And I would suggest in the threads and the undertones of when I'm speaking today, I'm actually pushing a little bit more on the autopilot. The autopilot part of ourselves is the part that gets so comfortable. Our neural pathways, they're all set in place and we do the same thing and it feels good. And then something comes in and it throws us off. Those pieces, those things, those newnesses create new pathways. And like I said, you can trust yourself. This is a practice of coming back into the home of who you are. You can trust yourself to know what is going to work for you, and that can change. So the practice of coming back then into ourselves is to live less of our life in the way that I can only describe as sometimes I've left work, I've driven home, and if you said to me, how did you get here? I wouldn't have even been able to tell you. That is autopilot. And we do so much of our lives like that. Another example I'd offer is a couple who was going out each week for dinner and they went to the same restaurant. And then in separate conversations, it was disclosed that neither one of them actually liked the restaurant they were going to. But when asked why they kept going to that restaurant, they said, I don't know, we've just been going for years and my partner likes it. And that's the part where we stop having conversations with ourselves and with one another to sort of say, hey, who are you now today or in this moment? And what do you enjoy? And what have you come to learn about yourself? And we stay in that place of curiosity, both with ourselves and with others. And we have a greater, deeper intimacy when we do that. So this idea of making room in your heart, your mind, your worldview for new information, I'd invite you into 3 different questions that could help support this. The knowing of yourself. Am I aware of my own wants, needs, and desires? And can I communicate them? A second piece to this is, am I willing to set boundaries? Much of our discomfort with the world around us and our fear of connecting with other people is actually the second piece, which is, if I know that I would really like to go to the beach today and somebody else is inviting me to an amusement park, am I okay to say no? Do I think I'm okay to say no? Am I okay to meet my own need and go to the beach? And really, what is my story about going to the beach on my own? Notice I didn't say alone. I am not alone. I am not alone. When we come back into understanding of just how deeply connected we are to the elements and all things, I am in good company. And so this idea of being willing to set boundaries then is where we allow room for other people to show up as they are, and we trust ourselves to interact with that in healthy ways that honor who we are, our needs, wants, and desires. We also trust other people to do the same. We become more willing to allow the world to be as it is and trust our ability to interact with it. Number 2, know your limits and capacity. So for those of us who have spent time believing, more time believing, we lean on the side of believing that we can't do anything. There's this real beautiful arc of coming into our capacity, our value. I can do things, and who knows what I could do, because there's universes in me. And then we get to the peak of sort of that kind of awareness, and the next thing to meet us will be this: limits and capacity. And that again is where we ask ourselves, am I valuable or available? And we start to value ourselves. And we start to come into a different understanding of our capacity, what brings us joy, how we wish to spend our time. So with limits and capacity, before having a challenging conversation with another, ask yourself at least one question and be honest with how you respond. Do I want to see this person grow? I really, really like this question, because oftentimes what we will do is we will give our energy away. We will give our energy away to all the things in the world that aren't the way that we want them. Okay? And we oftentimes do this, I promise you, at least one of the reasons, there can be infinite reasons, is to avoid the work that is ours to do. Back to number 1, I'd have to set a boundary, but then this relationship wouldn't be what I wanted. But then what am I going to do? Am I really going to go to the beach by myself? The second piece is to start to become aware of what moves us. Because the reality is, everything, everywhere, all at once is happening. I am not everywhere all at once. Everything, everywhere, all at once. And if I am, I'm going to be diluted. So it is starting to ask ourselves a question, particularly, where am I investing my time and energy? So for example, for me, within my queer identity, for people who say you should not exist, you do not have a place in this world, I am not placing my energy at all in trying to change their mind. That is not where my energy is going. Where it has gone in the last 5 years is to cultivating community of caring people who are practicing their own fierce journey towards being more of who they are and owning that. And in doing that, the loudness, the resistance of the world softens. It's a choice. I have to ask myself, do I want to see this person grow before I'm going to step into hard conversations with people? Know your values and commit to showing up, practicing them independent of anyone else, holding yourself accountable and noticing when you're not doing that. It's a part of spiritual maturity that I think we want to bypass. It's the natural consequences. Sure, you can do whatever you want to do. But if people are operating with 1 and 2, then you will interact with their boundaries. And they will tell you what is okay or not okay for them. And you're going to decide if you want to shift something or continue as you are. This is where we start to really deeply understand ourselves as co-creators of the world around us. The most deepest, easiest, tangible example I can give of that is my own abandonment wound. Fearing deeply abandonment and not recognizing that I was abandoning, ignoring, and pushing down most of myself. It wasn't from the world around me. It was from my own willingness to pick up those abandoned or exiled parts of myself and hold them and love them and look at them and be with them. That's where the change happened. So just a little recap then. Cultivating room for humility isn't about an act of humility then. It is about the conditions that make humility likely. And humility for me is just understanding that you are multitudes of universes and polarities and contrasting bits, and so is everyone else. And so is the world around us. And that my capacity to impact change comes from those things that are within my control and my ability to navigate that with courage, with care, with determination, with presence, to presence more of what is there. Room for acknowledging abiding breath. Oftentimes we take for granted things as simple as breathing. And now I see breath as a companion. Ensuring a quality of relationship with breath, I start to see that I can pause, that I can slow down my experience of that I'm experiencing and my response to it. I have the gift of speaking with you again on February 2nd, and that's really where we'll be talking about is powerful pauses and how to take these practices deeper into our lives. Room for practices towards humility, integrating our own practice of love, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. What would I do for myself today if I was loving myself? Why are we not asking ourselves that question? What would I do for myself today if I was loving myself? What do I enjoy is a pathway towards that sympathetic joy and giving ourselves those things that we need to be nourished. Self-care no longer as a luxury, but as an essential component to being a healthy, responsible, and accountable person. What does it mean to care for myself in real ways? And again, room for those values in practice toward embodiment. The truth is there is no other. The key is to remember, as many of my Indigenous teachers continue to say, remember to remember. And so my invitation to you this week as you navigate your world is to remember that you are worthy of love. Remember to give that in. Perhaps it's even a simple practice of what it looks like to be grateful for breath. That abiding heartbeat within you. That air that is there on your next intake, whether you notice it or not. And we start to presence that instead. We start to come into a deeper integration of who we are. Robin Wall-Kimmerer, the writer of Braiding Sweetgrass, says, if you didn't know better, you might not recognize raindrops and rivers as kin. So different are the particular and the collective. So I offer you this analogy as you think about yourself. We oftentimes can perhaps reflect on the quality of water. But water as a whole, whatever came to mind for you, water is more than that. See, if water was doing an activity and accepting its universes, water would be equally reflecting on its forms of rivers, lakes, oceans, stagnant mud puddles, the times when it's dripping out of a tap, the time when it finds itself held in a glass. And where am I even? And what is this? And the water would also acknowledge its times when its form in collaboration with other elements and things takes form as a hurricane, destructing and destroying in its path. The water, too, is essential and life-giving. The water, too, is 70 to 80% of who we are. So if I didn't know better, Robin Walls Kimmerer says, you might not recognize raindrops and rivers as kin. So different are the particular and the collective. And so today I offer you this, particularly when we think about interacting with a world that we can feel very disconnected from. The possibility is when we come back to ourselves and we see more of who we are, and we simply allow it to be there. Much like the robust nature of water, so are you. Thank you.